Good morning, everyone. I'm Ryan Becker, Vice President of Communications for Visit California. Welcome to Visit California's Outlook Forum Plus series, and thank you for joining us today. After we pivoted Outlook Forum, I know everyone's favorite word from last year, pivoted, to an all-virtual conference, we developed this extension to continue education and engagement year-round with our industry. And today, I'm excited about this particularly important installment. California and many of our destinations around the state became familiar with destination stewardship well before the pandemic changed the world and the tourism industry. And last year, Visit California launched a statewide destination stewardship and sustainable travel framework that focused on social, environmental, and economic sustainability. In fact, our guiding principles as an organization now include a commitment to employ destination stewardship principles that guarantee the sustainability of travel and tourism in California. As the pandemic recovery begins, California's travel and hospitality industry aims to rebuild in a way that can bring back visitors and protect what makes California so special. That means preserving not just the state's forests, beaches, and other environmental assets, but also the communities that benefit from and are sometimes disrupted by tourism, especially if those destinations are not managed sustainability. And that's never been more important than now, when people are flocking to outdoor destinations, and some of those visitors might not have experience in how to act responsibly or travel responsibly. Increasingly, visitors are demanding sustainability-focused tourism. The Travel Foundation has focused on sustainable tourism efforts around the world, and Visit California is thrilled to partner with them to share that insight with California at this critical time for our industry. Besides today's webinar, later this summer, Visit California will be offering more in-depth custom workshops to rural and urban DMOs, a how-to guide to rebuild destinations. This morning, it's my pleasure to introduce Terry Brown of the Travel Foundation to kick off our program.
Thank you, Ryan, for the introduction and for inviting us to this series. We're really excited to be partnering with Visit California on this Outlook Forum Plus webinar today. And in general, we're just really looking forward to working with Visit California on this program that we're developing together to support DMOs in California. So before we get started today, I just thought I'd quickly introduce you to our panel that we have for this webinar. So first up, we have Jeremy Sampson, who's the CEO at the Travel Foundation, and he's also the chair of the Future of Tourism Coalition. So he'll be providing, first of all, like a big picture vision on the future of tourism for us. And then next we have Graeme. Graeme's our head of strategic partnerships, and he'll be giving us an overview of some of the international consumer trends, including some insights from our own research. He'll be followed by Ben, head of strategic communications, who again, building on our global programs, will be sharing some examples and trends of what other DMOs are doing to adapt. And then last, but certainly not least, we're also excited to have with us today Elke Dens, who's our marketing director at Visit Flanders, and she'll be sharing our international case study today from Flanders in Belgium. And then at the end, we'll have a Q&A session with the panel. So please do write your questions as you go along in the Q&A box at the bottom, and we'll do our best to answer those at the end. So without any further ado, I'll hand the floor over to our CEO, Jeremy Sampson, who, as it happens, has actually spent most of his life in California.
Yeah, thank you very much, Terry. It's really a pleasure to be home, I guess virtually at least, and to come back after having the chance to share some ideas and thoughts with you all during Outlook Forum and to build a bit on that presentation here during Outlook Forum Plus. So looking forward to diving in. So the pandemic, it's been a time of change and uncertainty for everyone. And you all have had a pretty difficult time over the past 16 months managing that uncertainty, I'm sure. Over-tourism, under-tourism, changes in demand, changes in supply, new health and safety requirements, new ways of working. Lots of change in the last year and a half, as we all know. But this webinar isn't really about the pandemic, it's about the future. And although the tourism landscape looks very different now compared to pre-COVID times, the underlying forces of change that will shape this decade were there before, and they remain a challenge for us all to tackle and to tackle together. So what this period of reflection has done, I think, is to give us a chance to question business as usual. And it's provided us an opportunity to explore what the alternatives might look like. Travelers, businesses, governments, everyone seems more interested now in sustainability and improving the impacts of tourism than ever before. And I think there's a recognition and a desire to perhaps avoid the mistakes of the past. So what we're saying over the next 45 minutes isn't really just a reaction to COVID, but it will be set within the context of the pandemic. But it's a chance for us to change course and to recognize the long-term trends and get ahead of the curve. I believe that tourism has so much potential. I think we all do, and I think that's why we do the jobs that we do. Tourism is an economic activity like no other, supporting a significant proportion of small businesses, providing transversal benefits for many other sectors and for the communities that we work in. And we recognize that its impact is not just economic, but social, cultural, and environmental. And it can change the very fabric of a destination and how a community perceives itself, maybe for better or for worse. So rather than treating it like any other sector, I think we can imagine a world where tourism is actually recognized and valued as the force for good that we know and believe that it can be. Where tourism is prioritized as a catalyst for culture, for heritage, for conservation and preservation, for improving quality of life. Where tourism is something that happens with residents and with communities, not to them. Where quality experiences enrich the lives of both hosts and visitors. And where public and private sectors collaborate, and I mean genuinely collaborate, and are united by a shared agenda that has been shaped with communities, including their needs and those of the destinations at large at the center. And this is not just our vision. In 2020, we spearheaded the launch of the Future of Tourism Coalition with 5 other international tourism NGOs. And the goal is to align the travel industry behind a shared vision and create a collective and amplified voice. It's been a little over 12 months since we launched, and now we have almost 600 organizations which have signed up and aligned with our 13 guiding principles. These principles provide a new vision for tourism's future. They provide us a shared understanding of what better looks like. We like to talk a lot about building back better. It's important that we define it. And our priority is to find new ways to activate this unique global and multi-sectoral community that we're building to create a global hub for knowledge, for resources, for solutions. We're developing a toolkit to support businesses and destinations on their journeys and working with our community to identify gaps and improve that toolkit over time, as well as build a community that can learn from and foster connections with one another. So just a quick plug, if you are interested in this vision and would like to sign on to become a signatory, please do visit thefutureoftourism.org and join up. So I said this presentation was about the future, but let's just take a quick moment to look back at the past. I think you'll be very familiar with these statistics, and given the drop in 2020, you may in fact look back at them fondly. Direct travel related spending in California totaled $144.9 billion in 2019, a 3.2% increase from the previous year, and following similar growth trajectory for the last decade. But exponential growth is never really sustainable. And although we can easily identify the economic benefits of tourism across the globe, it's much, much harder to identify the costs of tourism. And even in 2020, when spend dropped all the way to 65 billion, tourism in many communities still had several impacts that needed managing. So over-tourism in many ways lacks a clear definition and in many ways is a complex issue. You may take issue with the message on the banner here, and I don't mean to single out any one destination, but clearly some residents felt that things had got out of hand, and this was getting international media coverage. Obviously, this is not only an issue in California. We saw many of the same signs, and honestly, some of them were worse here in Europe where we're based. But I think we can avoid mistakes of the past, and as tourism recovers, it's easy to imagine that without significant changes, the same challenges will be there. Destinations and businesses alike struggle with things like seasonality, economic leakage, low margins, overcrowding, overconsumption, overdependence, fragile environments, exclusion and inequity, not to mention threats from future pandemics, and of course, the climate emergency. In 2019, we at the Travel Foundation released a report with Eplerwood International and Cornell University, which is called Destinations at Risk, the Invisible Burden of Tourism. This report describes how the relationship between more visitors and more benefits sometimes provides diminishing returns. Not only did the costs or burdens increase, but visitor demand can begin to reach and breach various limitations. This doesn't always mean large numbers. Tourism often takes place in places that are particularly vulnerable, fragile ecosystems, places that offer traditional ways of life. And that's what makes them special, but even small numbers can lead to degradation if not well managed. So the invisible burden relates to the shared or common pool resources between the tourism sector and the community. Travel and tourism is, of course, highly reliant on those common assets, natural habitats, historical monuments, water and energy, public spaces, infrastructure, and social and cultural capital, when taken together, amount to what we might think of as the destination. The problem is that we've come to rely on success measures based on volume, numbers of visitors or trips and overall spend. And these are pretty easy to understand and continue to be the main numbers that we use to measure success. But the wider impacts of tourism in many ways continue to go unmeasured, and in some cases are still not well defined. So it's abundantly clear that new measures of success are needed. An increasing number of destinations, including Flanders, who I'm really pleased that we have joining us today, have started to recognize the traditional key performance indicators that focus on volume of visitors, trips, occupancy, spend are perhaps a bit insufficient. Of course, they're simple and seductive. Counting people and money is relatively easy. And in the recent years and decades of near continuous international tourism growth, they've become conveniently achievable measures of success. But I believe that we need to advocate for a better balance. We have to manage tourism's impact and harness its catalytic potential for tackling the big issues of our time. In particular, we need to look at reframing success, to look at measures like the impact of visitors on communities, the burden of tourism on natural resources, the distribution of tourism's benefits within the visitor economy, specific lens on diversity and inclusion. We need to have a clear idea of risk exposure and the contribution of tourism to the climate and ecological emergencies. We need to understand its contribution as well as its potentially catalytic role in addressing the challenge. I mentioned that COVID has been an accelerator, but the underlying drivers of change are longer term. And I'm going to turn it over to Graeme now, who's going to take you through some of the evolving global market and consumer trends to help us understand them a little bit better. Over to you, Graeme.
Thank you, Jeremy. So good morning, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here. I'm just going to take a few minutes now to share with you some globally reported trends to help you hopefully make sure that you are ready for recovery. So in order for us to recover, to build resilience, we need to have good insight into what's happening out there. We need to make sure that we've got the right plans in place, the right strategies in place to help us manage the associated impacts of these trends within our destinations, within our businesses. And it's also, really ideal opportunity, as Jeremy just described, to really think about what are the positive impacts we want to achieve within our recovery. How do we make sure we respond to those trends that might ultimately deliver a net benefit for our businesses, for our destinations. So we've compiled this information from lots of different places, through our global network, through working with destinations, through interviewing operators in source markets globally, and we're going to share a few of those today. So in terms of the emerging travel trends, what fundamentally we seems to be the case is that what we were seeing pre-pandemic has not gone away, has possibly in some cases even accelerated. Principle among these is the concept of experience over things, and also our increased interest in the impact of our travels. So while the world has changed and continues to change, it's not just because of COVID, and we need to be very mindful of this as we move forward. So in terms of our global trends, globally we're seeing a strong preference for travel domestically in neighbouring countries. This is probably no surprise to you. Places that are easily accessible by car, which can create new opportunities for us to spread the benefits of tourism more widely, but this potentially creates negative impacts, things like increased air pollution, congestion. And this is probably nothing new to many of you who, I know a lot of your tourism and recreation markets are indeed interstate or maybe even within state visitors. But globally, we're seeing this. We're certainly seeing this in Europe and in other parts of the world in which we're working. There's been an avoidance or possibly an inability to take long haul flights, and things like cruising has also taken a knock because people are obviously more fearful of mixing with others. We're definitely seeing that the European source market demand for destinations outside of Europe at the moment is quite low. This is obviously largely due to travel restrictions. So it just means that we need to perhaps reassess our promotional strategies, reassign budgets that we may have spent on key source markets just to hold on to those perhaps for a little longer or direct them in different ways. We know that travelers are very sensitive to even slight changes in the pandemic situation. I'm sitting here in the UK, and our government is flip-flopping between countries being on the green list, okay to go, or the red list, or the amber list, warnings or places that are close to us. So this is having a massive impact, of course, on bookings, on searches. Last-minute bookings are becoming the norm, and we're definitely seeing that visitors are acquiring much more up-to-date information on what's open, what they can do, what they can't do, what restrictions might be put on them, not just in their destinations, but also when they return. And so this is very hard for us to really manage those sort of swells and troughs of demand. We're also seeing that people perhaps are being a little bit more cautious. We don't really fully understand the economic impact of the pandemic yet, but there's a lot of people putting away money for a rainy day, or visitors demanding value for money from their bookings. Of course, the avoidance, wanting to avoid high density places, accommodations, activities mixed with strangers, this growing preference for outdoor activities, this is probably going to stay with us for some time. And that obviously leads to great opportunities for new product development, new activities, but also potentially presents overcrowding issues in some of our destinations. We're also seeing a big preference for private accommodation and rentals. This has grown massively since before COVID. It was growing, of course, before. But we need to think about the implications of that. Do we need to legislate? Do we need to license more in these areas? It's great to spread tourist footfall and spend into less visited areas, perhaps, but what are the implications of that? I just picked up a interesting statistic just this morning from a Forbes article that presented some data from AirDNA, which basically said that for US travelers, Airbnb and Vrbo bookings in small cities and rural areas is up 62% on summer of 2019. And I'm sure many of you are already experiencing this. And as a whole, the demand for short-term vacation rentals in the US is up 24% on 2019 levels. So as Jeremy showed that graph before, there's definitely growth happening. It's just happening perhaps in different places to what we're used to. So other trends that we've picked up on, the recovery of the travel industry is going to look a lot. It's going to have a lot of stake in health and wellness activities as key drivers. We're going to need to change our customer experiences, bring that calm, that level of comfort, serenity to the customer experience. Cleanliness, obviously, and hygiene will be front of mind. Customers want to see how businesses are catering for these things and also be informed through pre-booking information. There will be a preference for people who have been cooped up perhaps indoors for many months to do more active activities, fitness, cycling and hiking. A lot of us have got into these things during the pandemic, which of course again leads to interesting opportunities for product development, but also again those impacts perhaps on our environment, perhaps on our infrastructure. Health, obviously, a big part of that is health and nutrition, food and nutrition. So thinking about things like more, there's a lot of interest from consumers in holistic wellness, immunity, health boosting foods, ingredients, fresh local produce, which creates opportunity perhaps for agriculture linkages and markets. And I think there's also been this huge impact, this huge understanding of the impact on our environment. I think the absence of tourism has perhaps allowed some of our destinations to recover. So, or changes in behaviour in relation to these areas. So, we also need to consider opportunities around this, promotional opportunities around this, but the need to improve, of course, the sustainability of our products across the sector. So media coverage has really, and our own experience within our own communities has really pointed out the impact of the pandemic on our small business communities, the livelihoods of people within our communities. So, again, this will be an important trend moving forward. How do we make sure that we're presenting that local offer and encouraging people to support local local businesses, local employment through the pandemic. So let's just dive into those a little bit more. Some of those areas I've just highlighted. As Ryan said at the beginning, I know that California has doubled down on this. You guys are already doing some great work here. Sustainable products and experience have not gone away. That we have these concerns about the impacts on our world, not just of tourism, but of all the things that we do. These things remain a priority for consumers, and we would do well to ensure that those are maintained as priorities within our destinations, within our businesses. Ultimately, things like the climate emergency that we're facing, these are bigger and longer term threats to our world than the pandemic. So it doesn't make sense to cut corners here to achieve a short-term recovery. That would be very risky. We need to make sure this remains a priority. As I mentioned before, the impact on our local communities, the impacts we've seen with our own eyes, this is going to continue to be a key theme. Lots of businesses we're speaking to, lots of international businesses are doubling down on this. They want to be able to localize the supply chain. They want local products. They want to present themselves as being part of the communities. And this kind of idea of local value and doing good within communities is something that not only makes sense from a promotional perspective, but also makes sense for our destinations. I'm just going to give you a few key themes to sort of summarize really what we've identified here, that kind of spell out what has changed and what we might need to be cognizant of moving forward. So firstly, there's definitely been an impact on supply. So do you still have the same products and services in place that you had before the pandemic? How have they changed, or how do they need to change? How you might be providing information on these changes or on these products and services to travelers, and how are you making sure that you're targeting the right people? What about changes in demand? There's been this rapid shift perhaps to domestic or even hyper local tourism. How might your offer, your products, your services need to adapt to cater for this market over the international visitor? How can we make sure that we have the right products in place, that we're welcoming to those on our doorstep, while also remaining attractive to those visitors further away when they return? And how and when are people moving through your destination? What might be the implications of this? Is our infrastructure up to date enough to cope with increasing numbers of visitation to rural areas, for example? If we've got increased demand for outdoor recreation, that can easily put pressure on already very stretched infrastructure, our public restrooms, our waste services. How are we planning for this? How are we paying for this? And finally, how can we use this as an opportunity not to build tourism back to where we were before, but to build it forward? So what does success look like in the future? How can we invest in those positive, those businesses that will be future-proof, that will be resilient? How can we prioritize locally owned positive impact tourism providers? How can we achieve perhaps a more balanced tourism economy where the benefits of tourism are maximized and the negative impacts are better understood and managed? So I'm just going to leave it there and pass on in a moment to Ben. Thank you very much for listening, and I wish you all the best for the future that you have the opportunity to create. So I'm going to hand it over now to Ben, who's going to talk a little bit more about how DMOs might be adapting and evolving in response to some of these trends. Thank you.
Thank you, Graeme. So we heard from Graeme there the changes required by the market and by consumers. We also heard from Jeremy about the need for destinations to be aware of the invisible burden and the different impacts that need to be managed, the environmental, the social, etc. But there is one question which DMOs are beginning to ask, and while it is deceptively simple and may seem obvious, it's leading to some transformative thinking. And that is, why do we want tourism? This question basically implies that it's not just tourism for tourism's sake, that we recognize that there's a value that we want from tourism for a destination. And it also asks us to define the we in the question, which often means moving from a mandate handed to DMOs by their traditional constituency to a brave new world of putting residents and community needs front and center of destination management. And this is basically a move towards destination stewardship. Now, destination stewardship has been a trend that has been observed for some time, and there are a range of macro drivers that are underpinning this. We've been working with the World Travel and Tourism Council and the European Tourism Futures Institute to find ways to accelerate towards destination stewardship as an essential part of recovery. And as part of this work, we've identified these 10 drivers on your screen, which are pushing both businesses and the public sector towards greater collaboration and a focus on destination needs. I'm going to go through some of these in more detail now, but the report will be out later this summer. So even before COVID, much was being made of the move from destination marketing to management, and we saw some new strategies reflecting this. Again, some are on your screen, and more generally, the OECD flagged this as a trend in its 2020 report. The focus has been on a shift from quantity to quality tourism. And of course, Visit California and its partners, you guys who are listening today, are also on the path to stewardship, and that happened even before COVID hit, with a draft framework that certainly demonstrates leadership, covering issues such as resident sentiment, ratios of visitor volume to population density, seasonality of visitor patterns, quality of the visitor experience, infrastructure capacity, vulnerability of natural and cultural resources. But it's difficult for any organization to change into something new, and DMOs seeking to be destination stewards are discovering that organizations must evolve further to take on this reimagined role. Can we skip on a couple of slides, please? Next one, thanks, Tay. So here we have a simplified DMO model, and it just helps us to explore how we were in the past and how the evolution is coming about. So if we look at this traditional and probably still most common destination model, marketing basically means the selling and promotion of tourism products and the overall destination brand. Perhaps the DMO is a membership organization. It might have funds linked to hotel bed taxes or some other similar mechanism. Growth is basically has been the target and the mandate because the indicators that everyone has used is things like visitor numbers and spend. When community is addressed, it's usually focusing on job creation and the contribution to the local economy. As tourism has grown over the last decade before the crisis, destinations have become increasingly aware of some of the vulnerabilities of tourism, the leakage, the seasonality, hotspots, and the community conflict. So marketing strategies have evolved and developed. Now they are looking to promote out-of-season tourism, the local produce and the local culture, maybe some rural, less visited sites, and a move into sustainability based on things like resource efficiency of the organizations and initiatives that will help to meet consumer expectations, perhaps around things like food waste or plastic, single-use plastic in particular. ultimately, this still has meant more tourism is the overall goal, and that target and mandate remains basically unchallenged. And we would say that most destinations are here as sort of an evolved marketing organization. The problem is we go back to the invisible burden, because this is basically a very narrow definition of the product which is being marketed and even managed. Tourism is often understood to be the hotel, the tour bus, the visitor attraction, and there isn't enough consideration of the other components of the product, the environment, the communities, maybe some public utilities, public places, all of these things that are needed to service tourism. And that is exactly how the invisible burden comes about. So there is now a trend towards what many people are calling placemaking and understanding as placemaking, where leading destinations are recognizing that it's not just a move from marketing to management that's needed, but a move to integrate destination thinking with tourism and tourists at its center, with place thinking, which puts residents at the center. Destinations can and should be places where people live, work, play, study, and visit. Taking part in placemaking enables tourism to have a seat at the table with public and private sector to influence decisions on infrastructure, planning, retail, culture and sports, environmental protection, citizen well-being. And this is exactly what many DMOs are longing for, to have a seat at that table and to be taken seriously in these discussions. This offers many new possibilities for DMOs, levers for innovation and for product development and for destination management. It doesn't mean that we're saying that DMOs shouldn't retain their core expertise or necessarily expand their responsibilities beyond managing tourism and developing and marketing a destination. But there's a real opportunity to work within this paradigm, which has its foundation in resident engagement and satisfaction. So probably the single biggest reset required to enable destination stewardship is to create a new mandate by placing communities at the center of tourism development and management. It really is the case that better places to live are better places to visit. So just a few examples here. Did you know that the City of Barcelona has established a tourism council with community groups, industry, academia, and city council members? The council is a forum for discussing and planning the future of tourism in the city. The council also puts forward recommendations to the city council on allocation of tax revenues. Did you know that Greenland is seeking to implement a law that requires all destinations to carry out annual surveys on resident sentiment towards tourism? Did you know that cities like Helsinki, Reykjavik, and Bordeaux are working with participatory budgeting, so citizens decide how part of the city's budget is spent? And that Amsterdam aims to earmark part of tourism tax revenue to community funds to empower local citizens and businesses to influence investment in neighborhood development. One destination that is paying a lot of attention to its residents is Flanders in Belgium, which is why we are very happy to have with us today Elke Dens from Visit Flanders. We're going to start with a short video made by Visit Flanders pre-COVID as an introduction to her case study. Thank you.
Ik vraag me af wie morgen Vlaanderen bezoekt, wat die zal vinden, zal zoeken, wat die zal zijn, wie die zal ontmoeten. Gaan zij, de toeristen, vooral met veel en steeds meer zijn? Dat zijn veel opbrengsten, dat zeker, maar worden we hier echt beter van? Misschien is de kost groter dan we denken. Hoe meer bezoekers, hoe beter. Of creëert toerisme net meer waarde door met minder te zijn? De ruimte krijgen om te ontdekken wat wij willen delen. Wat ons uniek maakt. Blijft ons erfgoed onze houvast? Of worden het echte ontmoetingsplaatsen met een verleden en een nieuwe toekomst? Of wordt alles straks platgelopen door hordebezoekers? Bezoekers die vooral zichzelf willen zien. En wie zijn wij die hier wonen en werken? Gulle delers? Maken we elkaar echt rijker? Of staan we enkel achter de kassa? Hoe maken we het verschil tussen echt en net echt? Ik ben hoopvol. Want elke reis brengt meer tolerantie. Opent onze blik op de wereld. Kennen en herkennen we die andere mens. Verstaan we net iets beter wat echt kostbaar is. De wereld verandert razendsnel. En wij en Vlaanderen moeten mee. Op zoek naar de juiste balans. Ik reis bewust naar morgen. Reis jij mee?
Good morning from Belgium. Thank you, Ben, for the introduction. I wanted to show you this movie because it tells you the questions that we had pre-COVID. And I think the questions are still very relevant today. And I guess we're not the only one having these questions. So I'm really glad to be here with you and to be able to share the answers that we as an organization gave to these questions. And I'm not saying that it's the only answer that you can give to these questions. I'm not saying that it's the right answer, but it's our answer. And depending on the context that you work in, that you live in, it might be different, but I still hope my story can inspire you when you think about the future of tourism in your place. So here we go. We have made actually 5 fundamental shifts at Visit Flanders as an answer to the questions you've just seen. And I will guide you through the shift in the next 5 minutes. And the first shift, I think it's the most important shift. It's a shift in how we look at the world and how we have broadened our idea, and just realizing that we are all part of the same living system. The fact that we are all interdependent and interrelated was really very important to us. And also for me personally, I've been a destination marketeer for 16 years. I've had a lot of success in driving sales, in gaining revenue. And then you're confronted with the fact that this success can also have a perverse effect on others. And in Belgium, this was made very clear also at the policy level when we were starting to have discussion about cruise ships in the city of Antwerp. Now, this picture is Venice, but it's actually exactly the same. So for me, it would have been easy to talk to the cruise line, invite them, and to ship in 3,000 people a day in our city. But then we asked, what kind of value does this generate? What does this bring to the city? Does this bring real value to the local entrepreneurs? What about the residents who will see 3,000 people exactly at the same place at every day in their city? And do we actually give value to the tourists on the ship that can only be in our city for 2 hours while we have so much more to show them? So this was really a change maker. And it changed actually the way that we looked at tourism as a system. And we started to aim, instead of aiming for quantity and growing and more numbers, we started to aim for net benefit, taking into account the costs to all stakeholders. So you see that instead of standardizing and making more, we started to look at our uniqueness. What do we have here? And quality is not only defined as a quality tourist, but it's really the quality that local communities define when they think about tourism. So we are actually looking at how can we make our place better from tourism. And this flipped around our priorities, really aiming to empower local community. It also meant that this was going to be our starting point. So this made us realize that the next shift, shift number 2, was truly important. And it was about our purpose, about what we do, about our objective. And that changed from growing and looking at tourism as an end goal, measured by number of visitor or spending behavior. And we shifted it to flourishing or thriving, if you want, and looking at tourism as a means for a flourishing community. And we started measuring at every level of the tourism ecosystem. And on the next slide, you will see that it looks like a complex model, but in fact, it's not. We just measure not only at the visitor's level and see what makes him flourish, but we measure also at the resident level, at the entrepreneur's level, and also at the place level. And we even gave our place, or our castles and our rivers, we even gave them a voice, like they start doing in Barcelona. So if you look at this, it really changes the way that we've been looking at tourism, and look at tourism as a means that contributes to a flourishing destination. And here in the middle of the tree, what is really important for us is how we can balance the interest of all these stakeholders. So the balance in the destination is another new important indicator. This also meant that we started to work closer together with our stakeholders than ever before. And this is the shift number 3, because we used to work together with partners and we looked for them that could help us to achieve our own goals. And now we said, no, we need to change this. We need to be more open-minded, and maybe we start from a blank sheet and look who has a common interest or a shared goal. And it also means looking at other than the usual partners of a DMO. And I will demonstrate this with the following partner example. This is Agneta, and Agneta is a nun. She lives in the medieval city of Bruges, and she lives there with a few other nuns. So they really see the threat of them being forced to move out of the convent, and they don't want that. So they came to us and they said, okay, we have a convent and it's normally closed, but we would like to open it up for tourists because we have a library with old religious songbooks. It's in Latin, but we think it might be interesting. And we said, well, okay, like we normally would do, that is indeed interesting, but as a tourist attraction, you need to have, or you need to apply to certain criteria. You need to have opening hours from 9 until 5 p.m. You need to have at least 100,000 visitors a year. And then the nun said, no, that is impossible because we have silent hours during the days. And yeah, we could have maximum have 15 visitors a day. And that's really it. And then we said, like, okay, if we are repurposing as an organization, then we must be open to this kind of idea. And we did the experiment. And what happened? Well, first of all, the nuns got permission to stay there. So this made them really flourish. Secondly, for the city of Bruges, they were really happy to have these kind of really authentic guides that were telling people about the history and the religion in the city. And last but not least, the visitors, well, some of them were interested in the Latin books, but all of them were so enthusiastic about being able to go behind closed doors and see an active community of religious people, something that they've never experienced before. And this made us realize that when we look at the customer, we must maybe also change there and make a shift. And that's what we did. So when we talk about our visitors now, we shifted from a one-way transactional value with what you could call a customer. You know, a customer pays you money and return he gets a bed or another experience. So looking at visitors as they are like mutually beneficial or sharing value. So they give something, but we get something back from them too, and we share something with them. And here we said that we would like to go for visitors that are members of a community that is very much present in Flanders. So a community really rooted in our place. And one example of these kind of communities that we have in Flanders is this one. It's a cycling community. And it's maybe not really attractive for people like you and me, but those people, and we call them mammals, a middle-aged man in Lycra, and I'm sure that you know some of them because they also live in California, they really have something to share. They have the same kind of spirit for being competitive. And for them, these cobblestones that we have are really like a milestone in their life. So that's also how we challenge them on Strava. We say, if you call yourself a real cyclist, you must have at least once in your life have ridden our cobbles and bergs. And you know what? They know us. You can ask them. I'm sure that they know about Flanders, and they love us and they treat us so like gently, like friends. They also want to get to know us. So don't put them in a hotel because they will not spend the evening in their hotel room. They want to have a big living room. They want to chat, they want to share experiences, they want to drink like us a Belgian beer after the race. So this really brings in much more value than just looking at a customer. And this also brings me to the last shift that we made. And this is an important one, I think, because it involves people that work for a DMO. And when you talk about a shift in role, it's also a bit scary. And what we did actually before was a lot of destination development, destination management, and of course, destination marketing. But what we see when we started to work like this, we actually needed to shift and needed to become facilitators, enabling local communities to flourish and to help them to connect meaningfully with our guests. And this is really hard because there's no handbook on how to do that. So we're still trying and we're still struggling, to be honest, but we know it's the right direction. And it means for us listening a lot to other people and adjusting and always customizing, because there is no like standard. Every place is different and we need to respect that at a national level when we work with local places. But I want to encourage you with a last slide, and I deliberately took an example from that could be maybe California, because it's a community of big tree seekers, and we don't have that in Flanders, but you do. And I just wanted to share with you, there's a Facebook group for everyone, but if you really get into these communities, and if you find a community that is really strong in your place, I would definitely advise you to use it, because there will be no better research than just have a chat with those people, and they will tell you what you need to do. They will also tell you what they need to enhance their experience in your destination, because they also have shared values, different habits, or they maybe need space to share stories. So just ask them, and they will help you to make a better experience of your place, and they will also respect you in any way that you want them to do. And last but not least, they are the best promotion team you could ever imagine, because they are all already on the platforms that you might consider to use and to promote your destinations. They are there, and they have much more credibility than often we as a DMO have. And last but not least, and I can also tell this from an experience point of view, those people are also the ones and the first to come back after a crisis. So whether it would be a bushfire or COVID-19, those people are the first to come back, because they care about your place as if it was their own. So this is how we do it in Flanders, really in a 5 minutes presentation. I hope it can inspire you, and I would like to thank you very much for your attention. And back to Terry now.
Thank you very much, Elke, and to all the speakers today for all of your insights. And that's especially interesting to hear there at the end, Elke's story from Flanders, which really kind of is an illustration of some of the points that were made earlier, I think. And it was a great insight into some of the work which happens behind the scenes at a destination, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with. So now we're going to move on to the questions and answer section. We have about 10 minutes left for this section here. I can see there's a couple of questions that have come in already. So now's the time to find that box at the bottom and start writing your questions, and we'll try and select as many as we can in this time. Whilst they're coming in, a couple of them have been so far directed directly for Visit California, so I'll defer on those, and I'll let Visit California answer directly to those people. I'd like to start with one for you, Elke, maybe. If I'm interested to hear a bit more about the way that you involve the residents in the planning and defining the objectives of tourism. That's quite an innovative way of doing things, and I'm interested to know how did you turn the consultation with residents about what they want from tourism into objectives, and how will you measure this over time?
Yeah, well, it's a lot of different new measurements method, I think. Well, we did resident sentiment studies like Ben was explaining, of course, but this was maybe a way to get the approval of the residents for bringing in tourists. And now we actually start from them. So we ask if we think about a new investment, in what way it would improve their quality of life, in what way it would improve their well-being. We will also ask for a net promoter score. In what way would it make residents more proud if we would do this? And if we see that it has a positive impact on the residents, then we think that it also might have a positive effect on our visitors. But it's always evolving, and yeah, continuously looking to see how we can get in more indicators to have a better understanding of this.
Great, thank you. So yeah, just don't forget to add your questions. There's a little box at the bottom if you just click on the Q&A, and then you just feel free to ask questions to any of the speakers, not just to Elke, but to anybody else. In fact, I see one has just come up here on the chat forum. You can also use that. So it's for you, Elke. So it says, when you make the decision to move from quantity to quality, what was the response of business owners who are looking for the numbers of people to support their lodging or service businesses? What can you say to them to get them on board?
Well, it's a very good question, because it will pop up. We had it too, and they usually say, like, everything is fine. We don't care that much about the profile of the visitor as long as the beds are filled. And we said, okay, it's fine that they think this way because they need to earn money. So then we think it's our role to change and to get the right visitors that also bring value or make friends with the people that live here. So for the local entrepreneur, the accommodation, the lodging supply side, let's say, for them, I think it's fine as long as they see that it doesn't have a negative effect on the number of people visiting. So I've never said that we would go for a degrowth. We still go for growth, but a moderate growth that is in line with the carrying capacity of the place. But we do change the visitor that we reach out to.
Great, thank you. Okay, there's a few more for you, I'm afraid. So if you don't mind, we'll focus on Elke, then maybe we can move to some of the other panelists. So there's one here which says, if the hotels are paying, no, actually, let's move to this other more specific one for Elke. So we met it. So the person here from Truckee to Teo, sorry, I pronounced that wrong. We measured, would you recommend Truckee as a place to visit to a colleague or a friend? Scale 1 to 10, 0 to 10, NPS score, and baseline that. Would you recommend a different NPS question? We also asked the NPS question, would you recommend Truckee as a place to live?
No, that's exactly the questions that we also asked for the Net Promoter Score. We did add some how do you say, proud questions, because NPS is indeed about recommending your destination to others. That's what NPS is about. But we also asked, for instance, when we talk about art and culture in our cities, we ask also to the residents if it makes them more proud if we talk about our art and history to other people, because this is what sometimes happens, that people don't realize what they have in their place. Now, COVID has helped there, but this is also truly important, that they recognize the what is there, and they become more proud, because then they also become better ambassadors.
Great, thank you, Elke. So we have another question I'd like to broaden out and give Elke a rest for a moment. Perhaps to you, Jeremy. So there's a question here. So if the hotels are paying DMOs for marketing, who pays the DMO for stewardship? And perhaps we could broaden that out as well, just to ask you, do you think the commercial and competitive pressures are going to push aside some of the aspirations you mentioned about building back better?
Sure. Two very different questions, so I'll tackle the second one first. I don't think there's any question that there is tension. I mean, let's just be honest about that. There is, of course, and particularly due to what's happened in this particular crisis, many communities are facing a real a real economic downturn, a real challenge. Small businesses have really suffered, and I don't think there's any question that there is a bit of tension between commercial, at least theoretically, between commercial needs and the conversation that we've been having today. But I wonder if we're maybe just thinking about things in the wrong way, or perhaps not even asking the right question, because I wonder whether you can have both. And if we really start to think about things in the way that we've started to think about them today, asking the question about why do we want tourism, thinking about tourism as a value proposition, and reframing success, and to help us think through maybe what what success looks like differently. Are we able to achieve both? Because I think this message is not necessarily an anti-growth message. It is a message that is about making sure that growth is providing the right benefits to our communities, that growth is not putting the resources, the biodiversity, the way of life, etc., that tourism depends on in the long run to be successful at risk anymore. So I don't see why we can't necessarily work to achieve both things. Have great commercial success. You need good economics to be sustainable, and to be resilient and viable into the long run. So I hope no one takes our message, listens to this webinar and takes this message to be an anti-growth or a message at all. I just think if we don't understand the implications of that growth, then I think that's where the challenges occur. I would say that one other point I just want to make on that note is that I think it's true that in the recovery, there will be there's pent-up demand. There's a rush to bring business back, to get the sector revving up again, and that's really well understood. I also think that it would be crazy to think that the last 18 months of conversation and dialogue and mindset shifts that's happened in our industry, in the mind of travelers, in the mind of society, about what we've just been through, the very clear sort of risk that society faces due to some of the big challenges that we're dealing with, the huge conversation about equity, diversity, equity, and inclusion that has been centered in the US but has taken hold globally, that these things aren't having also an effect on how we think about the long-term implications of building back better, and what it really means to have tourism generate, be a catalyst for change in these areas. So I just think that both things are possible. It's just a really delicate balance. On the question about who pays for it, there are a variety of mechanisms. I mean, I think on the one hand, you might say, well, shouldn't everyone be paying for promotion and stewardship? If we think about the fact that the two need to go hand in hand, if we're trying to end up in a place where value is actually being generated. But that said, there are also lots of other creative mechanisms. Ben can probably address some of them as well, but in our Invisible Burden report, we talk about a variety of sort of interesting ways to look at how tax revenue can be allocated in a much better way for stewardship. There are ideas around creating trust funds that are sort of set aside in perpetuity to deal with particular issues around stewardship. There are certainly places like in the Balearic Islands where they have set aside some revenue from visitors on an annual basis and put that aside specifically for dealing with stewardship issues. And they were able to take some of that money and actually use it to support businesses throughout the COVID recovery because it was an emergency and that's what they decided to do. So I think there are a variety of mechanisms, and it's really up to, in many ways, perhaps the community to start to look at who's involved, how do we understand the situation and the needs in the best way possible, and make some decisions about how to best balance the spending that's happening to ensure that the sector is actually resilient and generating that value that we're discussing today.
Did you want to come in on that, Ben? Or do you
It's
think
really quick. I can see we're running out of time, but just to say that absolutely that question goes to the heart of the issue of what kind of organizational funding, what kind of organizational structures, what skill sets are required, what mandate is needed to be for DMOs as they take on this journey and they evolve. Certainly there are all sorts of public and private blends of funding models for DMOs, and DMOs who are on this journey are looking at those very hard to try and understand what's the most useful and viable model, funding model for them.
Great, thanks for that, Ben, and everyone for your answers. Unfortunately, we've come up to 10 o'clock. So we've kind of run out of time for the questions, but hopefully we've covered all of the ones which we asked there. And I can see there's been some lovely comments coming through as well. So thank you for all of those. So yeah, just remains for us to say thank you very much for joining us. It's been a pleasure to share our perspectives with you today and on the topic of future-proofing tourism destinations. There's a lot more to be said. But it's a good start, and we'd just like to thank Visit California again for the opportunity to be here, and we really look forward to our partnership that we're working on at the moment. So and any future collaborations that we have with you all. And just to remind you, a recording of this presentation will be available at outlookforum.com. So check that out. Okay, thank you again, everyone, and goodbye.